So, good morning everyone. So, welcome to our exercises breakdown for chapter 2, which would be all about the recording process. So, like what I mentioned earlier, there are two things that I really want us to be masters at after chapters 1 and chapters 2. So, I think by now, you'll understand that, rather than when people say, oh, magaling ka sa math, magaling ka sa accounting. More than math, I think the pinaka-important key into being a good accountant or parang doing well in BA 99.1 is really being very thorough about reading things. And number one, really knowing how to analyze the transactions. And then number two, aside from analyzing transactions, dapat very quick or very intuitive or very fast tayo in terms of knowing what would be the journal entry. So in terms of knowing the journal entry, what are the accounts affected and ano yung mga debit and credit. Making sure that in every transaction, dapat nagbabalance yung debit and credit natin. And therefore, in terms of our learning objectives, we want to go through the BAA framework, right? So I think ang kailangan baseline is we know what accounts are, we know kung ano sila assets, we know na liabilities, we know which ones are in terms of equity, etc., etc. Number two, we ultimately understand that debits and credits are basically just left and right. And then from there, the major focus of today's session really is let's master it, right? So let's master the steps in the recording process, creating journal entries, posting the entries, and then ultimately creating or making sure that we're experts also in terms of the newest tool that we're learning, which would be the trial balance, specifically locating errors. So admittedly, like what I mentioned naman, I want the 99.1 experience to be give and take. But at the same time, parang I think the last two numbers, hindi ko masyadong explicitly tinuro. And I think that's by design. So for me, parang ganun yung level of expectation natin in terms of like how different, quote unquote, the exams are or the quizzes are in terms of what's discussed in class and how to figure it out by ourselves. So don't worry, by today, I'll actually give a step-by-step process on how to solve it. But I hope na you were able to take a stab at it and parang figure out for yourselves parang how do you actually adjust trial balances, right? But later pa natin. So with that said, we can now begin um, the exercises breakdown for the recording process. So similarly to problem set 1, problem set 2 has 5 questions. And then like what I mentioned, we should not be intimidated by them because you can always break it down, right? Anong question type siya? And then anong framework are we gonna be using in terms of solving it? So these are the 5 frameworks na I hope you have begun discovering, pero today we're gonna be crystallizing. So that in terms of like any future questions, malalaman natin or magagamit natin the following frameworks. So with that said, let's just have a refresher on parang what have we been doing specifically for the last session. Right? So again, going back, the major goal or the major building block of any accounting system would be our accounts, right? So accounts are basically individual accounting records that keep track on kung nag-i-increase ba or nagdi-decrease a specific asset, liability, or equity. So, number one, hindi na pwede kayo nag-second guess by now. Parang, oh, ano ba to? Asset ba to? O liability ba to? Or equity? So, please, I hope na you intuitively know parang which accounts are assets, which accounts are liabilities, and which accounts are equity, right? So, two requests. Number one, please go over the definitions of assets, liabilities, and equity. Make sure that you know and also understand the keywords associated by it. So, pag assets, anything that derives future economic benefit, right? For liabilities, merong corresponding obligation ka that will cause an outflow to the entity. And then equity is just basically keeping track or the residual basically from assets minus liabilities, right? So if hindi nyo masyadong ma-soak in yung definition, the bare minimum is please memorize na, for example, prepaid expenses rather than expenses, they're actually assets, right? So let's keep note of those and please be really familiar with it kasi yun yung magiging bread and butter natin. So now that we know what our accounts are, the next step is know how the accounts work. right? So again, a T account is just making sure that per account, meaning per one account, natatrack natin ano yung beginning balance niya, so at the start, and ano yung ending balance niya at the end. And then, ano yung mga different changes niya, represented by the different debits and the credits inside the T account, right? So, title of account, and then basically you'll have your changes, and then at the end, it will give you an ending balance. So now, the next question would be, what are debits and credits? And basically, like what I mentioned, if you're coming in from learning objective number 1, we just have assets is equal to liabilities and equity. So the left asset is equal to our liabilities plus equity. So our debits should equal our credits, right? So from assets is equal to liabilities plus equity, the God formula or the God equation for chapter 2 would be debits should always equal to credits, right? For each transaction and in totality. So with that said, parang paano natin na-derive na yung assets, expense, and owner's drawings, ang normal account nila are debits, and ang credits are liabilities, owner's capital, and revenue. Right? So ito yung kailangan nating super experts na tayo. Na if I ask you, what are the normal balances of asset, expense, and owner's drawings? Automatic sa atin na that's debit. What are the normal balances of liabilities, owner's capital, and revenue? That's credit. So bakit importante malaman yung normal balance nila? Because that will tell you the effect of debits and credits. If it follows the normal balance, it would be an increase. If it goes against the normal balance, it would be a decrease. So if your normal balance is debit, lahat ng debits will be increased. So increase debit asset, increase. Debit expense, increase. Debit owner's drawings, increase. Credit liabilities, increase. Credit owner's capital, increase. Credit revenue, increase. But if it goes against the normal balance, then credit assets is a decrease, credit expense is a decrease, credit owner's drawings is a decrease, and then liabilities, owner's capital, and revenue, if it's a debit for them, that would be a decrease. So please, kailangan you don't second guess yourself also. That's gonna take you a lot of time. So kailangan automatic how we understand. So first, try to memorize this. Second, really familiarize yourselves by answering a lot of exercises para automatic yung debit and credit. And then third, if you don't, parang nagpanic kayo sa exam, nakalimutan nyo, this is how you look at it, right? Always go back to the expanded accounting formula. So this is different from how I explained it in class, pero baka ito yung mas magets ng iba, right? So I want it to be as intuitive as possible. So we started off with assets is equal to liabilities, and then we expanded equity. So that would be plus owner's capital, plus revenue, minus expense, minus owner's drawings. So the question is, bakit yung expenses and owner's drawings, ang normal account nila is debit? Technically, nasa right sila. So shouldn't it be credit? Right? Pero, what I want you to look at is that they're actually debits because of what? Because they're subtracted on the right side, right? On the left side. So, meaning, from credit siya, dahil may minus expense, minus owner's drawings, technically, that's a debit, right? And therefore, it will lead us back to this one, na assets, expenses, owner's drawings are debit, liabilities, owner's capital, revenues are credit. So with that said, let's just finally formalize everything with BE or brief exercise 2.1, right? So simple lang naman. This is just to test two things. Magaling ba kayong mag-classify ng account? And then, ano yung normal balance for that particular account, right? So for 2.1, is there anyone who wants to answer this? Kindly raise your hand kung meron. Kung wala, papasadahan ko na. Okay, thank you, Lawrence. Sige. Hi, Lawrence. Good morning.
Good morning po, sir.
Okay. Sige.
Yes,
So, for this, Lawrence, step 1, we made a T account, right? And then, let's first, before you tell me ano yung normal balance nila, kindly tell me kung ano, where it belongs, right? So, notes payable,
Sir, liabilities po.
liabilities. So, dahil liability siya, what would be the normal balance for this?
Credit po, sir.
Okay, and then meaning, ano yung effects ng debits and credits natin?
Sir, debit decrease po, credit increase.
Okay, good job. Yeah. Sige. For rent expense, what would be the category for this one?
Sir, ako pa rin po.
Ay, sorry.
Ako pa rin po sasagot
Yeah.
or
Half na lang natin. I-half natin. And then si Alea yung next. 3.
okay po. Sir, sa rent expense po, owner's equity.
Okay. Specifically, revenue ay expense, right?
Expense po.
And then, ano yung normal balance niya if it's expense?
Debit po, sir.
Okay. And then therefore, anong effect ng debits and credits for this one?
Increase debit po, decrease credit.
Okay. And then finally, for sales revenue, what would be the component for this?
Owner's equity revenue po, sir.
Okay. Correct. And then therefore, ano yung normal balance niya?
Credit po.
Credit. Yeah. And then therefore, effects would be?
Decrease debit, increase credit po.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Yeah. Thank you. How about Alea? Let's finish this na in the half. Let's start with equipment. What would be the component? Yeah.
Sir, am I audible po?
Yes. Thank you.
Equipment is an asset po. Tapos yung normal balance niya is debit. Therefore, mag-increase po sa debit. Tapos decrease sa credit.
Okay, thank you. How about owner's capital? I think clear na siya na owner's capital. So what would be our analysis for this, Alea?
Ano po, the normal balance po is credit po. Therefore, mag-decrease po sa debit, tapos mag-increase sa credit.
Okay. And then finally, owner's drawings, yung kabaliktaran, what would that be?
Lastly po sa owner's drawing, though part po siya sa equity po, pero since subtracted po siya doon sa right side, magiging debit po siya. Owner's drawings is debit po. Tapos yung mag-increase po siya sa debit, tapos mag-decrease sa credit.
Thank you so much, Alea. So yeah, there. So thank you so much, Lawrence and Alea. So now we've completed brief exercise 2.1. So basically, the reason why I wanted to start the problem set like this is because super crucial nito. Literally, kapag nalito kayo here, I want you to take a step back and really understand parang ano yung mga effects nito. And then, just please make sure na you're experts at this because it will really be the foundation for all of our accounting lessons, right? So, please, wag natin to baliwalain. It's not a theory question, it's really more about how we can intuitively answer and analyze transactions. So, this would be our answer for 2.1. So, I'll upload the Excel file after our session. Are there any other questions? Kindly thumbs up if everything's okay so we can proceed to the next one. Right. Okay, so I think everyone's good. Yeah, thank you so much, Lawrence and Alea. So with that said, let's now go to the recording process. So medyo alam na natin yung foundation. So now let's look at the overall process. So there are 3 things that we want to do in the recording process here. We want to analyze the transaction, we want to journalize, and then ultimately to post, right? So we're coming in from chapter 1 na I hope we understand how advanced transaction analysis work, right? So now, ang focus natin is, from this advanced transaction analysis, how did we derive journal entries and how did we derive T accounts or account ledgers? So account ledgers is just a formal version of a T account. So in order to do that, we need to look at the steps in the recording process. Right? So 3 steps again, analyze the transactions, journalize the entries, post to the ledger account so that ultimately you can create our financial statements. And therefore, through our financial statements, we can communicate to our various stakeholders, right? So basically, advanced transaction analysis hindi naman natin siya kailangan gawin. Meaning, it's not really required. The reason why we did advanced transaction analysis for chapter 1 is so that we can just let you experience or parang kailangan lang namin maturo how to classify accounts. Whether it would be assets, liabilities, and equity. And then ultimately to show you that dapat on a per transaction basis and in totality, dapat nagbabalance si assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. So ang ginagawa natin before was that we turned that whole paragraph into a table, right? So yun yung parang optional step that we did. But honestly, when you look at it, pwede na nating diretsuhin from reading it, pwede na nating diretsuhin to make a journal entry and to also post. Na in substitution of this advanced transaction analysis, we can actually make a journal entry and we can also make a T account, right? So to show you na pareho lang sila, I want you to look at it horizontally first and then vertically next, right? So let's look at it on a per horizontal basis. So pag horizontal, this row represents transaction event 1, transaction 2. So per horizontal or per transaction, we can actually create our journal entry. So item number 1, journal entry 1. Item number 2, journal entry 2. Item number 12, journal entry 12, right? So journal entry siya per transaction. Now, per account, meaning anything that has to do with cash, which is basically, so basically yun nga. So again, pag horizontal, meaning per transaction, we make journal entries. So cash, 435,000, credit owner's equity, 435,000 is the same as this row 1. Alright? But now, paano naman papasok si T account? Si T account, on the other hand, we'll talk about it on a per account basis. Right? Per account. So anything that affects cash. So vertically. Right? So basically, itong cash, yung isang column na to is actually our T account and then our ledger account, right? Pareho lang to. Pareho lang to sa T account ng cash and sa ledger ng cash, right? So basically, ang major point ko lang dito is that huwag kayong magulo na parang, oh, from advanced transaction analysis, we're now talking about journal entry and T accounts. They're the same thing. Now, for me, honestly, ang mas madali gawin for me is journal entries and then T accounts rather than this table. So, for me, ang gusto kong iwasan sa inyo is that I don't want you, unless explicitly asked, or unless it really helps you, I don't want you to waste time creating advanced transaction analysis and then dun nyo lang gagawing journal entries. Better na on a per transaction basis, you make your journal entries and then gawin nyo na lang yung T accounts after. I don't want you to do step 0.5, let's make advanced transaction analysis. Step 1, let's make journal entry. Step 2, we post. Kailangan a bit faster in the sense that let's jump straight to journal entries, right? And then let's just look at it from a T accounts basis. So with that said, paano tayo bibilis? By mastering how to create journal entries. So again, for theory, journal entries is a formal entry of a transaction to a specific journal, right? And ang kailangan talagang pumasok sa isip natin lahat or what we have to master is that we follow what we call a double entry accounting system. What that means is not na kailangan isa lang yung credit, isa lang yung debit per journal entry. What's more important is that our debits should always equal our credit. So as you can see, dalawa yung debits natin for this journal entry, isa yung credit natin. But at the end of the day, the 650,000 credit is equal to the 250,000 debit in cash plus the 400,000 debit of accounts receivable. So 250 plus 400 on the left is equal to 650 on the right. So basically, how to check if your journal entry is correct is that proper journal entries should be balanced every transaction. Meaning kung ito, the debit is like 200 plus 400, 600, and then yung isa 650 on the right, mali yung journal entry, right? So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng double entry accounting system. So, let's warm up una, right? So, let's warm up with D. Castro. So, 2.5 talks about D. Castro Company, which is basically has the following transactions during April of the current year, right? So the steps lang is, let's journalize using advanced transaction analysis muna. Then let's plug it in terms of ano ba yung effect niya sa T accounts. And then ultimately, yun. And then we'll see from there, right? So, I'll take this and then hati-hatiin natin yung long prob later, right? So, D. Castro opens a bar consulting agency and invested 450,000 in cash, right? So, ano yung mga keywords here? First is 450,000 in cash. So, we know it's cash. And then invested signifies na it's an owner's equity or an owner's capital. Both increased, right? So, 450,000 cash, 450,000 owner's capital. Dito papasok yung expertise natin in determining kung debit or credit sila, right? So dahil two accounts were affected, let's make a T account for cash. Let's make a T account for owner's capital. And then let's figure out, an increase in cash would be a debit in cash. And then an increase in owner's capital would be a credit in owner's capital. So debit of 450,000 is equal to credit of 450,000. First item, balance. So ultimately, you can skip these two steps and go straight to debit cash of 450,000, credit owner's equity of 450,000 on April 10 to signify na the owner invested cash to the business. Right. Next, after 4 days, she pays rent in advance for 6 months. 300,000 in cash. Now, ano yung clue dito? Well, ako, ang pinakamadali, okay, cash decreased by 300,000. But what's the other component? Rent. Is this a rent expense? Well, if you look at the definition of rent expense, kailangan parang nagastos mo na or na-consume mo na yung item. But here, the trick here is it's called pays rent in advance. Meaning, for April 14, nagbayad ka na ng rent that you can use for 6 months. And because you can use it for the next 6 months, that technically gives you future economic benefits. So rather than consider it first as an expense, we should first treat it as an asset. Bakit siya naging asset? Because hindi mo pa nakukonsume. Meaning you have 6 months left. After 6 months, expense na siya. Pero right now, in month 1, it's a prepaid rent. Prepaid meaning, binayaran mo na, hindi mo pa nakukonsume. And because hindi mo pa siya nakukonsume, you have future economic benefits, and therefore, we should categorize it as an asset called prepaid rent. So yun yung, for me, something that you have to take note of. Kapag may word na in advance, in terms of a particular expense, that should be called a prepaid expense, which is ultimately an asset. And prepaid expense, you can rename it as prepaid rent. Other examples of this would be when it comes to insurance. For me, for example, I started working. I want to get health insurance, or basically for my employees, right? Or fire insurance for the business. If I pay for a 2-year insurance, on month 1, when I paid for it, technically, may 2 years pa ako before I can consume it. Therefore, my future economic benefits yung insurance na yon. So I could categorize that as prepaid insurance, which is an asset. So yun yung the reason why it's prepaid rent, right? Not rent expense. So that's the thing that I wanted to highlight for this particular account. Now, kapag ako, when I was an accounting student, honestly, parang it didn't click to me as much. So what I did was, I memorized lang. Okay, if it's an expense and it's paid in advance, na parang it's paid for 6 months, for 2 months, for 5 months, for 4 months, asset yan. That's gonna be prepaid something. So, ganun lang yung pwede, another way of looking at it, right? So, ultimately, this is decrease in cash of 300,000, increase of prepaid rent of 300,000. So, now that we know that, basically, a decrease in cash would be a credit. And increase in an asset called prepaid rent should be debit prepaid rent. Meaning, our journal entry simply, pinahaba ko lang, is debit prepaid rent of 300,000, and then credit cash of 300,000. So again, hindi siya rent expense because you paid for an expense in advance. So may future economic benefits ka pa. 6 months mo pa gagamitin. You're in month 1, right? So that's still an asset. So I hope that clarifies one of the most common mistakes in journal entries. May questions? Margo, yeah.
Good morning, sir. I have a question lang. Sir, what if the entry says pays rent in advance for 6 months, this without the cash, right? So, kapag po, kunwari, accounts payable, like, when will it'll be accounts payable po yung entry?
Okay. So that's actually a really good question, Margo. So we have to break it down, right? Pays in rents in advance for 6 months, 300,000 on account. Pag nakalagay on account, accounts payable siya. So another way of looking at it is, if you paid for something that's not in cash, technically utang mo yun. So you will have a liability. So that would be an accounts payable. I hope you were able to understand my answer, Margo. Pero I think merong mga other exercises na I'll point back to this conversation later. Pero was I able to answer your question? So for me, let's break it down into 2 components. Let's analyze it, yung isang account, rent expense ba or prepaid rent? If it says in advance, prepaid rent. And then the next question is, paano mo binayaran yung asset na yun? Like what, equipment. Bumili ka ng equipment. How did you buy that equipment? Is it cash? If it's not cash, then it's probably accounts payable. Was I able to answer your question, Margo? Sandy?
Yes, sir. For the latter part of the exercise, mention a little
So
follow-up.
I think I'll go back to this question. But thank you so much. I really appreciate that one. Alea, do you have a question? Yeah.
Sir, ano po, sir, dun po sa A na part, sa previous slide po, yung, yan po sir, sa step 1. Yung
Okay.
sa step 1 po na nakalagay, transaction analysis po.
Apo.
Even po kasi dun sa exercise po nakalagay, the effect on the accounting equation. So parang ang nilagay ko lang po yung arrow lang po, walang amount.
Okay lang. Okay lang rin naman. Yeah. Mm-mm. So I think
Okay lang yun, sir.
I think ang importante lang naman would be as long as your arrows are correct. Kasi the difference lang naman would be the monetary unit, which is basically you can copy lang as 300,000. Yeah.
Okay. Noted po. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, can we can we write it po ba?
Yeah, sure.
Or no?
So I think
Okay.
the general rule naman here is that you can rewrite some of your handwritten answers based on our discussion and then submit na lang sa akin on Friday. And that I'll count that naman. So I think more than, like what I mentioned, I'm not that strict when it comes to exercises, whether you get it right or wrong. I'll give you all the opportunities to correct it. Ang particular na ako is submission on time on the particular problem sets. Yeah.
Noted po. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, everyone. So we can proceed now to third. So number 3, receives 120,000 from client for their services, right? So number 3. So now, naka-receive ka ng 120,000 pesos in cash for services. Usually, kapag naka-receive ka ng pera, more than anything than that would be a sales revenue, right? So, or service revenue for that matter. So, 120,000 tumaas yung cash, and then that's a revenue of 120,000. So, debit cash, kasi tumaas si cash. And then tumaas yung revenue, and the normal balance of revenue is credit 120,000. So, technically, the journal entry here would be debit cash of 120,000, credit service revenue of 120,000. Yan. Pays 20,000 cash for her utilities. Now, ito yung palagi tayo nagkakatalo rin. Utilities, lahat ng expenses. So, there are expenses na binayaran mo na on the spot. So, pag binayaran mo na, that should be an outright. Bumaba yung cash, 20,000, and then you recognize an expense, utilities expense of 20,000. So, that would mean bumaba si cash, credit cash, debit expense of 20,000. So, ultimately, that would be debit utilities expense 20,000, credit 20,000 in cash. Now, you will encounter na parang in real life, pare, bill ng phone ko. Parang binibill ka, right? Tapos parang they'll give you X number of days. So, pare, September, right? Nag-consume ako ng phone plan. And then binala ko September 27 for the month, right? So na-consume ko na yung expense, right? Pero pinagbabayad ako, let's say parang 5 days. So October 5 ako pinagbayad. If the transaction said I was billed for my September usage, hindi pa ako nagbayad. Pero yung payment ko is next month, which is another period. Rather than saying debit utilities expense, credit cash of 20,000, hindi ko pa siya nababayaran. The proper account is, pag binil ka ng expense, tapos may utang ka, that should be a credit in accounts payable. So automatic, pag may nakita kayong bill na expense, ang isipin nyo is, okay, may expense na siyang na-incur for the month, pero may payable siya, right? So it could be an accounts payable, it could also be a specific phone utilities payable, parang ganun. So the important part is may liability kang na-incur kapag na-bill ka na for an expense that you've already incurred for the month. Yun. So in essence, that ends our warm-up. So warm-up pa lang for our four journal entries. So again, the expectation ko here is that technically, in terms of like pacing yourself, the overall goal is by the time we have a quiz, kailangan parang pagkabasa nyo pa lang, may alam nyo na kagad kung ano yung journal entry. So please practice lang. Hindi pwedeng parang, ano ulit to? Parang ganun. Hindi. I think it has to be fast. Na pagkabasa nyo, may clue na kayo kagad na debit, cash, credit, owner's equity for particular accounts, right? So kindly thumbs up if everything's okay, and then we can proceed na to the chunk or the case study for today's lesson. Okay. So let's now, nag-warm up na tayo. Let's now fit everything together. So let's all together take a step back and look at bakit ba natin to ginagawa, right? So in chapter 1, as your intro to accounting, we did advanced transaction analysis. And then from there, gumawa na tayo ng various income statements, statement of changes in owner's equity, and balance sheet. So like what I mentioned, break down accounting into two parts. The hard part, which is basically how to analyze transactions, and then the the hard part and the matrabaho part. The matrabaho part is creating your statements. Now, ang sinasabi, ang paulit-ulit kong sinasabi is, pagdaan nyo na sa income statement, paggawa ng creation of financial statements, this should be mechanical. Meaning, i-memorize nyo lang naman how to do it. Wala na kayong iisipin which item goes what, or parang mag-a-add, etc., etc. It's just plug in and play. So, for me, be really good at advanced transaction analysis. Be really good at creating statements. So, practice lang kayo on how to create statements. Right? Yun. So, yun lang naman. Two parts. Mahirap part, matrabaho part. Right? So now, level 2, nag-level up tayo for chapter 2. Instead of the advanced transaction analysis, gawa na tayo ng journal entries. Let's learn how to post, which is basically the same as advanced transaction analysis in a different form. And then, just to make sure everything's balanced bago tayo sumabak sa income statement, let's create a trial balance. And then, let's learn how to create income statement, changes in owner's equity, and balance sheet. So, ito yung process flow. So, ito lang. If you're good at this, then most likely you'll get a perfect in quizzes and exams, right? So now, with that said, our case study for exercise breakdown 2, or our major focus would be about high rule services. So for high rule services, September, may 12 transactions sila. So off the bat, you'll probably start thinking na, so this is how I want you to approach this, right? So this is how I want you to approach how to answer 2.3. Huwag kayo ma-intimidate. So, when you read this, pare, lumabas na sa exam. Ang babasahin ko is, okay, what's the company about? It's just a random company. What's the date? September. So my first question is, September, is it for just the 1 month? Titingnan ko. All the way until the end. Oh, it's about 1 month. So, ang titingnan ko lang here, hindi ko babasahin all 12. I'll just look at it and say na, okay, there's probably 12 transactions kasi 12 numbers. So, I'm expecting na at least I'll make around 12 journal entries. Pero ano ba yung hinihingi, right? So, ano yung hinihingi? I need to make a journal entry. So, I need to make 12 journal entries. I have to make a T account. I have to make a trial balance, and then I have to make the different financial statements. So, mahina yung kalaban. Step 1, let's just do journal entries first, right? And then, I'll just make sure na kung hindi ko alam kung paano yung pangalan, I'll always go back to the chart of accounts to make sure na ito yung mga ginagamit kong pangalan for the assets, right? So, pare, instead of supplies, it has to be office supplies. Instead of prepaid expense, it has to be broken down into prepaid rent and prepaid insurance. So, yung chart of accounts, titingnan ko lang siya kapag feeling ko kailangan kong gamitin yung account, right? So, to double check lang if tama lang yung mga names na I'll be using. But in essence, step 1, when you see a long problem, ano lang ba yung hinihingi? For this one, dahil it's a comprehensive problem, lahat hinihingi. So, with that said, dun ko palang babasahin yung item number 1. So, ang expectation ko lang is, papasadahan ko yung 12 journal entries, and then, gagawa lang ako ng journal entries for each. Yun lang. Yun lang yung focus ko. Step 1, journal entries. And then, I think there was a question. Sorry, I was only able to answer it now. But, for quizzes, unless explicitly stated, ako personally, ang hinahanap ko lang would be debit, credit. Yun lang. And date. Debit, credit, and date. Right? So, as long as you have those three, that should be fine. So, let's help each other for basically the long problem. So, I think there was 12. So, maybe we can do 4 journal entries each person. Are there any person who wants to answer? If none, I can go through it naman. Yeah. Okay, sige. Alea, let's do the first 4. Yeah.
Yung, okay po.
Sige. What would be your journal entry for this one?
Ano po, for debit cash, 40,000. Tapos credit owner's capital po, 40,000.
Okay. Yeah, correct. Sorry. So for typo, yung Arsha Capital. Okay. Next, they hired 2 employees to work in the warehouse. They will be paid a salary of 3,050 per month. What would be the journal entry for this?
There's no recorded entry for this.
Okay. So no entry. Why? So for the people that are confused, bakit? Let's look at the event. Basically, nag-hire lang naman siya. Wala pa siyang na-incur na expense kasi hindi pa naman nagtatrabaho si Pura and Robbie eh. It's the start of the month, September 1, wala pa silang expense. Dahil walang expense, wala ka pang liability, right? So, correct, Alea. Next, number 3. Nag-sign raw sila ng 2-year rental agreement. And then he paid 24,000 in cash in advance for the first year. What would be the journal entry for this?
Debit, 24,000 po, prepaid rent. Tapos credit po is cash, 24,000 din.
Correct. So again, dahil nag-pay siya in advance, that's prepaid rent of 24,000. And then, next, bumili siya ng furniture and equipment for the warehouse. And then a cash payment of 10,000 was paid immediately. What would be our journal entry for this one, Alea?
Debit po equipment, 30,000. Tapos credit cash, 10,000. Tapos accounts payable po, credit din, 20,000.
Okay. So thank you so much, Alea. Correct. So that's correct also. So now, pause muna tayo, time out. Let's analyze this. So ito yung mga relatively mahihirap na journal entry. Pero I want you to break it down. I want you to think about it as, okay, bumili siya ng equipment. So that would mean debit 30,000. Now, how did they pay for the equipment? Equipment 30,000, in cash raw. So automatic make a credit of 10,000. Pero then you'll notice, hindi nagbabalance. Debit 30,000, credit 10,000. Kailangan, how much would I need for it to balance? Well, I need 20,000 in credit. Pero now the question is, ano yung account that will credit 20,000? Well, since hindi niya pa nababayaran outright, meron siyang utang. Therefore, accounts payable yung i-credit natin. So I think this goes back to the question ni Margo kanina na paano mo malalaman kung cash ba or anything or accounts payable? Well, for me, the good thing is cash will always be explicit. If hindi niya binayaran ng cash, then technically may utang siya, right? So sometimes you can pay a mix of cash and a mix of utang or accounts payable. So debit 30,000 equipment, credit cash of 10,000. So kinokopya lang natin, and then the remainder, ano yung remainder? 30,000 minus 10,000, 20,000. So the next question is credit 20,000. Ano yung i-credit natin? Accounts payable. Tumaas yung utang natin, right? So it makes sense, right? So again, please understand ano yung importance dito. Kindly thumbs up if everything's clear, or are there any questions for this particular type of transaction? Ayan, James, you have a question. And Trish also. Baka pero si James muna. Yeah.
Sir, I just have a question dun sa when he hired the two workers.
Okay. Go ahead.
What I did, how I journalized it was I put 6,100 debit on salaries expense and 6,100 credit on accounts payable. So pretty much what happens is at the end it cancels out. So linagay ko as accounts payable debit at the end and cash 6,100 on credit. So is that accepted or talagang you're not supposed to put anything?
Okay, wait lang, sorry. Sorry, I'll skip lang a bit. Kung saan sila nagbayad, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, okay, if I had to be so net, I think it will magka-cancel out eh. Parang,
Yeah, it cancels out po.
sorry, ano oras na? Sige, wait lang. I'll bring my Excel. Pero really good question. Actually, I appreciate this, James. So, for this one, sorry. I'm just bringing up an Excel. Or sige, maybe I can use this. Can you see the Excel, James? Hello, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hello po. Yes, sir.
So basically, ito yung pinagtatalunan natin, right? This one, in September 2, no entry. Right? And then in the transaction 12, nagbayad siya ng expense in cash. What you did instead was let's just yeah. So ang ginawa mo would be salaries expense, salaries payable. And then this was like 6-1. Like this. So parang nag-recognize ka ng expense, and then at the end, rather than this one, you de-recognize your liability. So parang the credit of the liability of 6-1 offsets the debit of salaries payable of 6-1. So ang matitira na lang sa'yo is that you'll have a debit of salaries expense and then credit of cash of 6-1, which is
Parang nag-cancel out po.
the same lang, right? So for me, okay, so to be honest, this is how it will be graded. So in terms of like grading, what will probably happen is you'll probably be correct in the net. Pag tinanong yung mga wala siyang effect on your financial statements and trial balance, which is good, right? Pero you'll probably get mistakes in terms of like how you analyze lang the two transactions. Right? So, nag-chain lang yung error mo for number 2 and number 12. So, one thing I want to be clear lang here is that I get yung attempt and I appreciate yung interpretation. Pero at the same time, ang key takeaway doon is that when you hire somebody, technically hindi pa sila nagtatrabaho. So you shouldn't recognize the expense at the start of the month. You should recognize the expense at the end of the month. So parang in future, parang make sure na no entry talaga siya when you hire. Mag-recognize ka lang ng expense pag nakatrabaho na sila. And then another discussion na whether binayaran mo ba or may utang ka sa kanila kasi hindi mo pa siya binayaran for the month. Was that able to answer your question, James?
Yes, sir. Pero one last question. What if you listed it as accrued salaries expense?
Accrued salaries expense. I think parang same lang rin siya, James. Na parang the idea lang talaga here would be so parang basically accrued meaning hindi mo pa nagagastos yung expense, right? So parang prepaid expense siya. So parang asset naman. But I think parang simply mas madali lang titingnan na parang when you look at it technically for salaries, right? Kasi parang when we're looking at mga future economic benefits, we're looking at more than one period. So if mapapansin nyo, if it's a prepaid rent, it's at least in advance of like a next period. But we're talking about salaries on a monthly period, right? So meaning parang parang in terms of like commonly used, hindi siya future economic benefit in the sense that parang technically nai-incur mo lang yung expense as they go from day to day. So ang normal na nangyayari is that you'll recognize a salaries expense at the end of the month. And then if you pay them, then it's debit salaries expense, credit cash kasi you paid them. Or kung may utang ka sa kanila for the month of September, babayaran mo sa October, that would be a salaries payable instead. So debit salaries expense of 6,100, credit salaries payable of 6,100. I hope I was able to answer your question, but maganda yung analysis for this one. Clear naman, James, for this one.
Yeah, understood po. Thank you.
Thank you. But maganda. Like honestly, parang it shows rin naman na may you have good foundation for it. So for those who parang got confused, net, ito lang yung gusto kong sabihin. If you see that they hired at the start of the month, automatic, no entry. Okay? So if you hired an employee, start of the month, no expense. Fast forward to the end of the month or the end of the period, mag-incur ka na ng expense. So that would be salaries expense. Now, the credit will depend whether binayaran ba nila or hindi. For this case, binayaran niya. So therefore, we will have credit cash. Kaya ang entry natin would be no entry and then debit salaries expense of 6,100, credit cash of 6,100. Yun. Trish, sorry, you have a question.
Hi, sir. It's about writing the journal entries lang po. So for like in item 4, wherein there are multiple credit transactions, dapat po ba like based on like yung cash or accounts payable, like based on the amount or based on liquidity po yung order?
Okay. So honestly, for this one, wala namang strict rule. I think yung strict rule is that your debit should equal to your credit. So if your answer was like debit equipment, credit accounts payable, credit cash, that would be okay also. Apologies lang for OVLE. I think that's the reason why you asked that question. Parang sa OVLE, isa lang yata yung order na inaccept. So I think it's more of like a formatting thing in OVLE. But then technically, both would be accepted. Yeah.
Alright, thank you, sir.
So, slight request lang for everyone. Let's be patient with the OVLE. As much as possible, I tried formatting it para flexible siya for us. So for OVLE, if kware una yung try, equipment 30,000, accounts payable 20,000, cash 10,000, na mali kayo sa credit side, pagbalik ta rin nyo lang and check whether that would be accepted. It's more of a programming issue than a slight learning lesson for us. Yun. Okay. So, with that, we can proceed. So, medyo papasadahan ko na lang, but my request is, if mayroong particular item na may question kayo, please raise your hand para we can discuss it for that particular item. So, let's go. Number 5, paid 1,800 cash for a 1-year insurance policy. So, this is an insurance. Is it an expense or is it prepaid insurance? Well, it says for a 1 year. So, ito pa, mga tips. So, aside from in advance, if it gives you a 1-year policy, 2-year policy, 6-month policy, that would be prepaid insurance debit of 1,800, credit cash of 1,800. Okay, purchase basic office supplies for 420. Supplies, if you memorize your accounts, is an asset. Debit asset of office supplies of 420, credit cash for 420. Number 7, nag-purchase ka pa ng office supplies pero on account. So again, separate issue. So office supplies, debit of 1,500. Paano mo binayaran yung office supplies? Yung kanina, you paid for in cash. For here, hindi ka nagbayad ng cash. So therefore, it would be what? Debit office supplies, credit accounts payable, 1,500, right? So, yun. Number 8, total revenues earned on September 27 were 20,000. So for this one, automatic ang gagawin ko is credit service revenue of 20,000. What would be my debits? Well, 8,000 raw in cash, so debit 8,000. And then, meron raw 12,000 on account. So, debit ko right now is 8,000, credit ko is 20,000, may missing na 12. So, I need a debit of 12,000 on what? Dahil hindi siya cash, ano siya? Well, on account. Is it payable? Well, definitely not, because this is something you'll receive. So, if it's something you'll receive, then it should be debit cash of 8,000, debit accounts receivable of 12,000, credit service revenue for 20,000. Okay. Number 9, you paid raw for the supplies na for accounts payable on the date it was due. So, out of the 1,500 na utang mo for the accounts payable, you paid 400 of those. So, bumaba si accounts payable, so debit accounts payable, credit cash of 400. Number 10, receive 30,000 from customers in payment of accounts receivable. So, yung may accounts receivable ka, out of the 12,000 na accounts receivable, may 3,000 raw na nagbayad nun. So, what will happen? Bumaba yung amount na you na expect to receive, accounts receivable of 3,000. So, that should be credit accounts receivable. And then you got cash. So, that would mean debit cash of 3,000. And then, finally, the last two, received utility bills on September 30. So, you were billed utility bills in the amount of 380 to be paid next month. May expense ka na kasi you consumed utilities for the whole month of September. So, that should be utilities expense, debit, and then hindi mo pa babayaran. So, credit accounts payable of 380. And then finally, ito yung discussion namin ni James kanina. Paid the monthly salary for the 2 employees, totaling 6,100 at the last day of the month. So, salaries expense, debit, 6,100, credit cash of 6,100. So, things to take note of. So, okay, I'll call on you, Margo. I'll just finish this point. So, things to take note of. Ano pa yung mga parang trap questions in accounting? Pag kuwari, dalawa yung employees mo, titingnan mo kagad, ano yung amount? You should look for the words in total or each. Kasi kung 6,100 each, that should be 12,200, right? Pero dahil ito, if you notice, kanina, we hired 2 employees, 3,050 each. Kaya naging total, 6,100. So, please be careful. Particularly kung pare may 2 employees, may 3 customers, you should always look kung each ba siya or in total yung amounts. So, those are the things na usually dumadali sa atin. Sorry. Go ahead, Margo. You have a question. Yeah.
Hi, sir. Sorry. At the end of the month, I also placed additional 2 entries kasi sir yung sa prepaid rent and prepaid insurance. I place the one na rent expense debit 2,000 and then prepaid rent credit 2,000, like yung monthly payables. Is that right, sir? Or should I not place it?
So actually, thank you so much, Margo. So I think that's an advanced topic. So that's a chapter 3.1 na so basically we can discuss that on chapter 3 para lang hindi rin malito yung classmates mo. But I don't think that's wrong. I won't penalize you for doing something in advance. But then that would mean maraming implications siya on your T accounts, right? Na parang hindi magbabalance lahat nung mga financial statements, etc., etc. So with that said, I'll review yours na lang. I'm not sure. So okay, this is separate. So net, what you did was correct. Pero ang caveat ko lang doon is that hindi magtutugma yung answers mo to what I'm gonna discuss now and also the answer key. Just because we isolated the problem for chapter 1 and chapter 2 because that's a chapter 3 lesson. So if you're worried about anong grade implications, I'll just take it for what it is. And then I'll try to reconfigure my statements based on your answer. So don't worry about getting deductions for that one.
Noted, sir. Thank you po.
So for the others, no need to worry about what Margo mentioned. It's really more of an advanced topic. I want us to focus muna on 12 yung items. Let's just make 12 journal entries. Let's not think about what happens at the end of the month. What she's talking about are adjusting entries. That's something na we'll discuss for chapter 3. So nasa level 3 yun. So let's focus muna on level 2. But yeah, very exciting topic. Actually, yung nagpapahirap sa accounting. So let's just finish this. So step 1, we're done. Journal entries. We have 12 journal entries. But naging 11 because yung isa non-journal entry account, right? So now, let's post to the T account. So honestly, ito lang yung parang reminder ko sa inyo. If it was a long problem, and if that was a long problem, that would probably be around 50 points, right? If it was a 50-point problem, this would comprise of around 22 points kasi 2 points per journal entry, right? So you're halfway. But technically, at this point, kung tama yung 11 journal entries nyo, you'll get a perfect because this is all mechanical. What do I mean by mechanical? Honestly, it's just following a specific flow. So, ano yung flow? Step 2, let's make a T account. Okay, for those na na-overwhelm on T accounts, let's just make T accounts as they come. Let's look at it chronologically. Let's start with journal entry 1. Ano yung mga T accounts na na-affect? Cash and owner's capital. So, meaning, ipa-plug in ko lang, debit 40,000, owner's capital. Journal entry 2. Ano yung mga accounts na natamaan? Prepaid rent, and then cash. So, tatlo pa lang. So, debit, prepaid rent, credit, cash. Journal entry 3. Ano yung mga bago? May equipment na raw and may accounts payable. Pero cash meron pa rin. So therefore, debit 30,000 equipment, credit cash, credit accounts payable. And then ang maganda dito is that if you did this well, left and right, edi kung left to, right to, right? So prepaid insurance, bago na naman yung account. Left of 1/8, so 1/8 sa prepaid insurance, and then right sa cash, 1/8. So credit, 1/8. Journal entry 5, may bago na naman. So make another T account, office supplies. Debit office supplies, credit cash of 420. Journal 6, may bago bang accounts? Wala. So we just add debit office supplies, credit accounts payable. Journal entry 7, debit cash. So may bago. Accounts receivable and service revenue. So debit cash, 8,000. Debit accounts receivable, 12,000. And then on the right, credit service revenue. Journal entry 8, accounts payable 400. Cash of 400. 9. Debit cash 3,000. Credit accounts receivable 3,000. 10. Utilities expense. Bago yan. And then that's a debit of 380. And then credit accounts payable 380. And then finally salaries expense. Bago rin yan. salaries expense. Debit salaries expense of 6.1, credit cash. And then we total, right? So for total subtotal of debit of cash muna 51,000. Subtotal of credit in cash 42,720. So hindi ko na i-add, kindly add na lang for yourselves. Pero if we subtract so ano ipagbabangga natin? 51,000 is bigger minus 42,720. 8,280. So 8,280 and then credit of 40,000, owner's capital, 24,000 debit prepaid rent, equipment, debit of equipment. And then pagbabangga ulit natin, sino yung mas malaki sa accounts payable? Well, obviously it should be the credit. 21,880 minus 400. So it should be a credit of 21,480. 1,800 sa prepaid insurance, debit. Office supplies is debit 1,920. Pinabangga mo yung 12,000 accounts receivable with the 3,000. Should be a debit of 9,000. Service revenue of 20,000. Utilities expense of 380. And then 6,100. We're done with step 2. Are there any questions in terms of the T accounts? Kindly thumbs up if nakakasunod pa tayo. Okay. Alea, you have a question.
Sir, excuse me po, kasi nung nakaraan, sinabi mo po, it's better na maglagay ng beg. Beg po.
Okay. Yeah.
Kasi napansin ko po wala po dito, so medyo nag-overthink po ako.
Okay. So for this, Alea, honestly, walang beg. I mean, I didn't put beg because technically yung beg mo will always be 0. Right? So parang regardless kung so if you have beg, good. Pero ang itsura ng beg mo correct would be beginning of debit of 0 cash, beginning of owner's capital credit 0, 40,000. Parang ganun yung magiging itsura niya, right? So what's the reason for that? Because kaka-start lang ng high rule services. So usually the beginning account is helpful if it's the second period, meaning let's fast forward to September. After September, October. Sa October, ang expectation ko is yung beginning ng cash would be 8,280. Parang ganun. So, net-net, kaya lang walang beginning is because lahat sila, ang beginning nila is 0. And parang for illustration purposes, I just decided to omit it. If you have a beginning balance of 0 and it's on the proper side, then well and good. Pero kung wala, okay lang rin. Yun. I hope that was able to answer your question, Alea. Okay naman tayo. Okay, thank you. My question. Okay. So I think we're able to do that. So step 3, okay. So step 3, let's make the trial balance, right? So again, what are trial balance? It is at a specific point in time. So ano yung format ng trial balance? Para lang siyang balance sheet, right? High rule services, trial balance. As of, so please, as of. It's a point in time. It's a snapshot. So trial balance as of. Ang format lang ng trial balance is you need, ano yung accounts, ano yung debit, ano yung credit, and then ano yung total. Ang major reason bakit tayo nagta-trial balance is dapat the debit should equal the credits, right? So basically, we start with assets first, so cash, in order of liquidity. So cash, AR, 9,000. Office supplies, so office supplies is more liquid than prepaid insurance, prepaid rent, equipment. So we're done with the assets. So some things to note. I-memorize nyo na lang yung order of liquidity. But this is how it usually goes. Cash, AR, supplies, prepaid expenses, any prepaid expense, right? Whether it be insurance or rent, and then equipment, right? Then next, you go to your liabilities. So accounts payable, wala tayong notes payable, so tapos na yung liabilities. List all OC and OD. So owner's capital is 40,000 credit, and then owner's drawings is wala, right? Wala tayong owner's drawings. So step 4, list all revenues. Ano yung mga revenues natin? Isa lang. Service revenue of 20,000. Step 5, list all expenses. salaries expense muna and then utilities expense. Ito, expenses are ordered by magnitude, right? So salaries expense is pinakamalaki. You add all of those together, add all of your debits. It should be 81,480, credit of 81,480. But at this point, doon ka na makakahinga na parang, okay, parang wala naman akong maling ginawa, nag-balance. But it wouldn't hurt to double check your journal entries. Right? Yes, Alea, sorry. Go ahead.
Po, dito po kasi sa part na to, comparing it po kasi dun sa check figures, mayroon pong account for rent expense tas insurance expense. Pero ang ginawa ko lang po dito, katulad po ng owner's drawings, nilagay ko po siya pero nakalagay po 0. Would that be fine po?
Yeah. So sorry. So for that, I did that so that para lang ma-appreciate nyo na those are the different accounts and then pag 0 siya, hindi natin siya ilalagay. So the general rule is kung 0 naman siya, no need to put it in your trial balance. I just put that so that pag sa exam may lumabas na owner's drawings, you know where it goes. Or yung rent insurance or rent expense. So para lang alam nyo yung grouping. So net, I think the answer there would be if it's 0, don't put it in the trial balance. Yun. And then, yes, Marco, sorry. Okay, kindly thumbs up na lang, Alea, if I was able to answer your question. Yeah.
Sir, bale, tatanggalin ko na lang po completely.
Yeah. Pero dun sa OVLE, just put 0 pag hindi siya Pero in the okay lang, I mean you don't need to rewrite your handwritten. I'm saying parang sa quiz. Pag 0 naman siya, wag niyo nang ilagay. Parang so parang ito yung itsura dapat, right? Pero that was just to illustrate na if ever may mga accounts na ganun, dun sila usually lalabas. Yun. Like I think may notes payable rin dun. Pero I just wanted to showcase na it should be under accounts payable pero on top of owner's capital. Yun.
Sir, wala naman po magiging demerits po kung hindi ko po.
Yeah, no naman. Pero yun. So I think it's more of like a formatting thing. Pero again, for the quizzes, if 0 yung account of the account, like if you put owner's drawings, for everyone's simplicity's sake, just don't put the account if 0 naman yung total niya. Kasi it's not a material information. Kasi wala siyang amount. Okay.
Thank you po.
Sure. Thank you for that clarification also, Alea. So with that said, last 3 steps is we turn it into our balance financial statement. So again, honestly, trial balance is optional, pero I want you to be good at trial balance kasi yun yung pinang-check niyo kung nagba-balance yung figures. So one way of looking at it is that using the trial balance, we can now create our 3 financial statements. First is income statement. So ang format lang ng income statement, again, paulit-ulit. High rule services, income statement, hindi siya as of, but it's a period. So for the month ending September 30, 2022, there are only 3 components that you want for income statement. What are your total revenues? What are your total expenses? And then what would be the net income and net loss? Revenues, basically 20,000, and then expenses, listed down by order of magnitude. So 20,000 minus 6,480, net income of 13,520. So this is your income statement. So as you can see, itong portion lang na to, yung titingnan natin. Next, statement of changes in owner's equity. Again, similar siya to income statement na it's for the month ending. Ano yung 4 components ng statement of changes in owner's equity? Beginning capital, total additions, total deductions, ending capital. Our beginning capital should be 0 because we just started the business. What are our additions? Ang additions natin would be owner's capital, kung ano yung ininvest, and net income or net loss. So 53,520. In the OVLE, you will notice na in the deductions, I think I put a net loss because kung 13,520 was a net loss, it shouldn't be in the addition, but it should be in the deduction. Please take note of that. So owner's drawings of 0, so 53,520. So nandito lang siya, isang line item lang siya. And then kinuha natin yung net income from the 13,520 from the income statement. And then finally, for financial position, basically just list down the assets. So that would total 75,000, list down the liabilities. And then get your ending capital from your owner's equity of 53,520. It's nag-balance. So ultimately, we were able to finish these questions. Yeah. Yes, Alea, go ahead.
Sir, sorry po. Yung sa ano po, sir, sa statement of changes in owner's equity, sir, may ano po, ito na po ba yung format? Ito lang po ba yung format na dapat naming magawa? Kasi po parang hindi ko po kasi alam kung saan ko po kinuha tong format na to. Yung pinasa ko po.
Sige. I think for this one,
Same naman po yung sagot.
okay. I think for this, Alea, I'll review that one in particular and then I'll get back to you. Yeah. Pero no worries. Pero ideally, let's just follow itong format na to. Yeah. But thank you for that. I'll look into it then. Sige. There. So thank you so much. So now, and for the last 15 minutes, let's now focus on the theory and the trial balance, right? So again, the journal entry is just the formal entry of a transaction to a journal, and then account ledger is just the formal version of a T account, right? And then how it works in the real life is that every day mo ginagawa yung journal entries and every day mo ina-update yung ledger. Na binabasag mo lang yung journal entry, so yung cash pupunta dito, and then yung owner's equity pupunta sa owner's capital. So now let's master the trial balance. So basically, the trial balance, ang gusto lang naman niyang i-point out is that your total debits is equal to your total credits. And with the help of the trial balance, you'll be able to get the income statement by looking at this portion of the trial balance. You'll be able to get your changes in owner's equity with this portion of the trial balance. And then with the upper portion of the trial balance, you'll be able to get your balance sheet. Now, the trial balance is just like, ano ba, parang it's like your 75% assurance that you did everything correctly. Why 75%? Well, this is not an exact figure, this is just an estimate. It's because the trial balance isn't perfect. It has a lot of limitations. So if a transaction is completely omitted, so please memorize this and also familiarize yourself. If a transaction is completely omitted, if an incorrect entry was posted, if the journal entry was posted twice, my incorrect accounts or my offsetting errors. So, an example of offsetting errors. Transposition error is instead of 8.24, ginawa mong 8.42. Sliding error, ginalaw mo yung decimal point. Instead of 8.24, dapat naging 82.4. Or data entry na mali, meaning instead of 100, nagawa mong 10. All of these errors cannot be detected by the trial balance, right? So these errors cannot be detected. So how do we then correct these errors? So now, let's look at the Black Zone company for E20.5, whether it will balance or not. So for this, ako na lang, papasadahan ko na lang. But I want you to soak in, no worries. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So, for this, we'll ask ourselves, will it balance? Ano yung difference and ano yung larger column? So, debit posting of 5,000. So, it'll balance? No, it won't balance because hindi niya na-record yung debit. So, the difference is 5,000. Since hindi niya na-record yung debit, ang larger account would be a credit of 5,000. An equipment purchase on account was journalized as debit to equipment 10,000. So, ito, mali pa rin to. Will it balance? Yes. So as you can see, the trial balance was not able to identify the error. So this is an example of a data entry error, right? So hindi niya na-detect, but it will balance. A debit posting of 4,200 was made twice. Will this balance? No. Why? Because isa lang yung nadoble niya, yung debit portion. So dahil na debit yung debit posting, it's a difference of 40,200. And since debit yung nadoble niya, the larger column would be a debit. A credit posting of 35,000 was credited to service revenue. So ito, will it balance? Yes. Why? Because unearned service revenue is a liability. The normal balance of an unearned service revenue is a credit. The normal balance of a service revenue is a credit. So kahit mali yung credit account na ginamit niya, it will still balance. So, no difference. Walang larger column. Pero mali pa rin. Hindi na-detect ng trial balance. A payment of 17,000 in cash was paid, and then debit utilities expense, credit to cash of 17,000. Outstanding payable. So ano yung mali dito? Ang mali dito is yung utilities expense. It should have been accounts payable. Right? So, ang normal balance ng utilities expense is a debit. Pero dapat what should have happened was bumaba yung liabilities mo, which should have been a debit. So, mali lang yung debit account na ginamit niya. So, it will still balance, but there's still an error. Right? So, finally, a debit posting for 11,000 was omitted. So, isang portion lang, yung debit lang. Hindi niya na-post yung debit, so that's 11,500. So, meaning, ano yung larger column? Dahil na-omit yung debit, walang entry sa debit, may corresponding 11,500 credit na na-record. Therefore, the larger column should be 11,500. And then a credit, so this is again another data transposition error. A credit of 8,765, 8,756. So now, dito lang tayo maggagawa ng calculator. So, it's 8,765 minus 8,756. The difference is 9. And therefore, ano yung mas malaki? Yung debit. Bakit? Because dapat yung credit, it should have been 8,765. But it was 9 less. Ang na-record lang was 8,756 in credit. When in fact, yung sa kabila, yung debit na 8,765 na-record sa debit. So the debit is higher by a credit by 9. So I hope clear. Meron pa bang questions? If there are questions, kindly ask them na lang at the end. So there are 2 exercises I want you to really be good at. One was our third exercise, and then this is our second case study. This is about our trial balance naman, right? So for trial balance, this is one of the hardest, and I hope you were able to solve it for yourselves. Pero this is my recommended way of solving this. Step 1, I will notice na, okay, may trial balance na binigay. Oh no, this is a type of question na pinapa-correct tayo ng trial balance. Because paano ko alam na pinapa-correct tayo? Our debits is not equal to our credits. And then, it mentioned 5 errors. So, basically, ang gagawin ko lang is, I will look at the required. So, I need to correct the trial balance, and then I need to determine the profit and loss. For this particular example, I will focus on correcting the trial balance. How do you correct a trial balance? We look at it per entry. So, ano yung error number 1? For me, the best way to go about this is you ask yourself, what is, so ano yung error, and what should be? Ano ba yung correct treatment? And anong difference ng what is or yung error and yung correct treatment, yun yung magiging key adjustment natin. So ano yung ginawa niya? A 2,000 purchase of props on credit was not posted. So what is currently wala siyang entry. Hindi niya nilagay or hindi nalagay sa trial balance. So what should be is that meron kang journal entry dapat na nilagay dun sa trial balance na debit equipment and props, credit accounts payable for 2,000. So our key adjustment is just basically put it there. So debit equipment, account to be adjusted, plus 2,000 sa debit, accounts payable, plus 2,000 sa credit. So that's 1. So gawa ka ng table. Number 2. The balance of dancing fees was overstated by 400. So what is the error? Naka-overstate raw. So si dancing fees of 12,400 na credit is overstated by 400. Meaning, what should have been is that the dancing fees should actually be 12,000 in credit. So instead of 12,400, dapat 12,000 lang. So ang key adjustment is subtract by 400 to correct the overstatement. So kung may overstatement ka, you have to subtract the particular side. So therefore, adjustment natin is dancing fees, and then the credit is 4,000. So 12,400 minus 400 should be equal na to the 12,000 na credit ng dancing fees. Next, a debit to accounts receivable of 100 was posted as 100 as 10. So currently, ang ginawa niya was yung AR raw, dinebit niya by 10, not 100. When in fact, the AR should have been debited by 100. So ang key adjustment natin is, na-debit niya na yung 10, pero dapat 100. So we get the difference. 100 minus 10, may 90 pa siyang kulang na kailangan niyang i-debit sa accounts receivable side. So, accounts receivable plus 90 sa debit. Right? Error number 4. A 700 debit to drawing account was posted as a debit to non-Engine's capital. So nagkamali siya where it should have been. So for these types of errors, my request lang is, kung nagkamali siya, reverse and then debit proper. So Engine's capital debited by 700 when it should in fact be the drawings that should be debited by 700. So sorry, this should be Engine's. So reverse or credit generally capital. So Engine's capital. So, ni-reverse ko lang. Dinebit niya si Engine's capital ng 700. So, we have to add back 700 sa credit. Why is it add back 700 sa credit? Because the normal account of an owner's capital is credit. By debiting 700, technically, you subtracted 700 on that credit side. So, for example, going back to... Sorry. So currently, our Engine's capital is 24,300. Ang nang effect nung dinebit na ng 700 is yung 24,300 should be increased by 700 kasi binawasan niya ng debit of 700. And then drawings should be just copy it. So yung drawing should increase by debit of 700. And then, the last one is, the balance of electricity and gas expense was listed as 5,200. So, it was a transposition error. So, electric gas was debited by 5,200 when in fact, it should have been debited by 2,500 only. So, 5,200 minus 2,500, 2,007. So, kailangan natin decrease debit by 2,700 kasi nag-over debit siya. So, you subtract 2,700 sa electricity gas expense. So with that said, we have our 5 adjustments already. Are there any questions before I move on to parang applying it sa trial balance? So basically, after ng table na to, we just get the unadjusted trial balance and then we analyze. So yung equipment and props, kailangan raw plus 2,000 sa debit. So currently it's 5,000. So 5,000 plus 2,000, gagawin natin tong 7,000. Accounts payable, kailangan raw natin i-add ng 2,000. Currently it's 3,000. So 3,000 plus 2,000 in credit is 5,000. Yung dancing fees na discuss na natin, it's overstated by 400. So technically, 12,400 minus 400, 12,000. Accounts receivable, yung dinebit raw niya ng 100, ay yung debit raw niya na in-add lang niya by 10, actually dapat 100. So, for accounts receivable, instead of 410, we have to add 90. So, 410 plus 90, 500. And then ito na yung sinasabi ko. Yung mistake raw niya was that dinebit niya si Eugene's capital. When you debit owner's capital, ang normal balance niya is credit. So, pag dinebit mo yung normal credit account, technically, ang ginawa niya was, before, dapat, ang correct nito is 25,000 siya. Pero sabi niya, i-debit ko to ng 700. By debiting a credit portion of 25,000 by 700, naging 24,300, nabawasan niya. Right? So, ang adjustment natin is, mali na dinebit niya si owner's capital. So, we have to bring that back to the credit side. So technically, to correct a wrong debit for a normal account na credit yung side niya, it should be plus 700 sa credit. So owner's capital, Engine's of 24,300 plus 700 we were able to raise it back up to 25,000. And then Engine's drawing, which is basically what she should have debited, should be 800 plus 700, 1,500. And then electricity, gas, and expense, na over debit niya, gagawin lang natin 5,200 minus 27 is 2,500. When you add all of these together, you will get 52,000 and 52,000. So we were able to balance it. And then honestly, this is just mechanical again. Plug it in. So order of magnitude lang. So you'll have a net income of 3,000. Okay. So I think we have one question. So I think everything is straightforward. I think kailangan nyo lang ulitin is yung number 4. I think yun lang yung request ko. Make sure na you really understand what happened sa number 4. So again, as a refresher, ang mistake raw sa number 4 is that it affects two accounts. The owner's capital and the owner's drawings. The mistake raw was, ito kasi yung result ng mistake niya. 24,300 of owner's capital and 800 of owner's drawings. Now, ang nangyari raw to cause this to be like this is that instead of debiting drawings, ang na-debit ng accountant was 700 of owner's capital. But then you'll ask me, kala ko ba dinebit niya ng 700 yung owner's capital? Bakit walang lumabas dito na 700 owner's capital? It's because if you go to the T account of an owner's capital, so I think if everything's clear naman, for those who have class, go ahead. I'll just finish this question and then I'll upload the recording. But thank you so much, everyone. So for those who are curious, I can just have a quick discussion lang on it. So sige, kuha lang tayo. Okay, so I will make this owner's drawings. Sorry, I'll make this owner's capital. And then this is owner's drawings. Okay. And then, ang nangyari raw was 24,300 to. And then the owner's drawings is 800. Right? Sorry. Kasi ito yung itsura ng unadjusted balance natin. So our unadjusted balance looks like this. 24,300 si owner's capital. And then si owner's drawings is 800. And then ang mistake raw niya that caused this end figures dun sa unadjusted trial balance is that nag-debit raw siya ng 700 sa owner's capital when in fact dapat yung 700 nandito. Right? Nag-debit siya dito ng 700. So, ang nangyari technically is that, ang question nyo is, bakit walang lumabas ng 700 na debit? It's because, pinagbabangga natin yan. Meaning, for it to become 24,300, probably what happened is, there's a 30,000 credit, and then nag-debit siya ng 700. So, nung pinagbangga niya, 30,000 minus 24,000, sorry, it's 25,000 pala. So, in order to get 24,300, nag-debit siya ng 700. So, ang assumption natin was there was a credit of 25,000 of owner's capital. And then she made her mistake. Nag-debit siya ng 700. Dahil nag-debit siya ng 700, yung subtotals niya magbabangga. 25,000 minus 700, magiging 24,300. Kaya siya naging 24,300. Therefore, how do we correct her mistake? Well, one way of looking at it is remove that, and then magiging 25,000 yan. Or, to remove the mistake of a debit, which in fact, parang technically you can look at it as a way of looking na a debit is just basically minusing your credit by 700, right? Kasi 25,000 credit, a debit of 700 is just basically saying 25,000 minus 700 is equal to 24,300. So in order to reverse that error, what we did instead would be, let's add back the 700 in credit. Kasi yun yung nawala. So basically, in-add lang natin yun. Kaya siya naging 25,000. And then, yung isa, yung owner's drawings na 800, pinlog in lang natin yung debit dito. Kaya siya naging 1.5. So, yun lang yung sa number 4. I hope medyo intuitively you kind of get it. But another way of looking at it is like this, through T accounts. Ito yung nangyari. So, technically, ang ginawa mo lang, tinanggal mo lang. Kaya naging 25,000 siya. So, ang correct answer lang dito is owner's capital is 25,000. Owner's drawing is 1,500. Yun. So, I hope that makes it clearer. Yung number 4. So, yun lang yung request ko. Kindly double check number 4 rin. Kasi I think out of all, yun yung pinakamahirap. But with that said, I hope everything's clear. So that officially ends our lesson. So I will see you guys. Are there any questions or clarifications before I end the class? If not, kindly thumbs up if everything's clear. Or parang kung may questions pa kayo, go ahead. Para lang we can. Pero if none, kindly thumbs up and then I'll make my final announcement. There. Okay. So with that said, thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you on Friday, 8:15 again. And then I'll make an announcement kung tuloy ba yung quiz on Friday or it will be moved. We'll just have to check with the other classes. Yun. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great Wednesday. Thank you.